How long have you been with us, Melody? 29 years, is it? David Langston leaned back in his imposing leather executive chair, his voice unnervingly casual, almost conversational. That's quite the accomplishment. 29 years, I confirmed, my voice steady despite the knot tightening in my stomach, and 362 days, to be exact. My eyes flickered to the plain manila folder resting innocuously on his polished mahogany desk. In all my years at Grantwell Manufacturing, nearly 3 decades navigating corporate structures and protocols, I'd never been summoned to a director's office late on a Friday afternoon. Something was deeply wrong. My name is Melody Reynolds. I'm 61 years old, and until approximately 5 minutes ago, I was the senior compliance officer for one of St. Paul, Minnesota's largest, most established manufacturing companies. I dedicated my entire professional life to ensuring Grantwell operated within complex legal and ethical parameters, meticulously documenting irregularities, standing firm against convenient shortcuts. My pension, the cornerstone of my retirement plan, was set to fully vest on Monday. Just 3 days away, the milestone I'd patiently, diligently worked towards for my entire adult life was finally, tantalizingly within reach. Or so I thought. If you believe in standing up for what's right, even when it costs you, hit that subscribe button for life stories. David Langston slid the manila folder across the vast expanse of his desk towards me. His gaze deliberately avoided mine, focusing instead on some imaginary point just over my shoulder. Due to unforeseen budget constraints and necessary restructuring, he recited, the words sounding rehearsed, impersonal. We're having to make some difficult decisions. We're letting you go, Melody. Effective immediately. The room seemed to tilt, the muffled sounds of the office outside fading into a dull roar. Budget constraints? Grantwell had just triumphantly announced record profits in the last quarterly report. This wasn't about budgets. This was about Monday. This was about my pension. This is your severance package, he continued, tapping the folder with a perfectly manicured finger. Standard terms. Sign it by close of business tomorrow, or you forfeit the offer entirely. HR will escort you to clean out your desk now. I should have felt a surge of white-hot anger, the shock of betrayal, perhaps even the desperate urge to plead, to remind him of my decades of loyalty. Instead, a strange, unnerving calm washed over me. This wasn't random corporate downsizing. This was precise, calculated, timed with surgical accuracy to fall just 72 hours before my pension fully vested, before nearly 30 years of contributions became irrevocably mine. Thank you for the opportunity, David, I said quietly, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside. I picked up the folder, holding it lightly, making no move to open it. He looked momentarily surprised, thrown off balance by my composure. Perhaps he'd expected tears, shouting, protests, but I'd spent my career analyzing patterns, identifying discrepancies, seeing beneath the surface narrative, and the pattern here was stark, undeniable. I stood up slowly, smoothed the front of my sensible navy skirt, and walked out of his office with my head held high, my dignity bruised but fundamentally intact. Janet from Human Resources hovered awkwardly near my cubicle as I began packing my few personal belongings into a standard-issue cardboard box. The framed photo of my late husband, Thomas, his warm smile forever captured. The slightly leggy potted plant my daughter, Elizabeth, had given me 15 years ago when she left for college. The heavy, slightly tarnished plaque I'd received for 25 years of dedicated service. I didn't take much. Most of what truly mattered, the institutional knowledge, the ethical framework I'd tried to uphold, the respect I thought I'd earned, couldn't fit in a box. I'm so sorry, Melody, Janet whispered, glancing nervously towards the uniformed security guard waiting patiently, uncomfortably, near the elevators. This just isn't right. It is what it is, Janet, I replied softly, offering her a small, reassuring smile I didn't feel. But inside I knew better. This wasn't just wrong, it was almost certainly illegal. Retaliation. For the past 4 years, particularly since David Langston's arrival 6 months ago with his mandate to streamline operations at any cost. I had been meticulously documenting a disturbing pattern of financial irregularities. I wasn't a detective, just a thorough compliance officer doing my job. I'd sent detailed, evidence-backed memos up the proper chain of command, flagging suspicious accounting practices, questioning mismatched inventory reports, even presenting evidence of backdated quality control certifications, a serious violation. Each time, my concerns had been dismissed, buried under layers of corporate jargon, or returned with polite but firm instructions to focus on more pressing matters. As I walked through the polished granite lobby for the final time, the security guard held the heavy glass door open, his expression a mixture of pity and discomfort. Have a good weekend, Mrs. Reynolds," he mumbled, clearly hating his role in this corporate execution. I nodded politely, meeting his gaze briefly. "Thank you, I believe I will." The drive home felt utterly surreal. 29 years, 11 months, and 27 days of loyalty, dedication, and often personal sacrifice, all culminated in a curt dismissal, a cheap manila folder, and a flimsy cardboard box. The gentle April rain tapped against my windshield as I navigated the familiar streets of St. Paul, Minnesota, past the imposing cathedral where Thomas and I had exchanged vows decades ago, beyond the high school where Elizabeth had proudly graduated, towards the modest, comfortable brick bungalow I'd maintained on my own since becoming a widow 12 years prior. I thought about the sacrifices, the missed school recitals during those demanding early years when I worked late nights, striving for promotions to better support my family. The family vacations cut short by sudden compliance emergencies requiring my immediate return. The countless evenings and weekends spent hunched over dense regulatory documents and complex audit reports that nobody else had the patience or expertise to decipher. I had given Grantwell Manufacturing the prime years of my life, my unwavering loyalty, my sharpest focus, believing wholeheartedly in the reciprocal promise of security, the eventual reward of a pension that would allow me a dignified retirement. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I switched off the engine, but sat quietly for a long moment, allowing the full weight of what had just happened to settle over me. David Langston, barely 6 months with the company, arrived with a shiny MBA and a reputation as a ruthless streamliner. I'd known instinctively that we would eventually clash. My role was to ensure compliance. His was to cut costs, and those two objectives were increasingly at odds under his aggressive leadership. The final straw, I suspected, was my recent refusal to certify compliance on his latest, most ambitious cost-cutting initiative, a complex restructuring of supplier contracts that, in my professional opinion, skirted dangerously close to violating several key federal regulations. I had documented my concerns thoroughly, presented them clearly. What I hadn't anticipated was how swiftly, how brutally, he would move to eliminate the obstacle, me. Inside the quiet house, I made myself a strong cup of tea, the familiar ritual grounding me slightly. Sitting at my worn kitchen table, I finally opened the severance package. The terms were even more insulting than I'd imagined. 3 months' salary, paltry compensation for 3 decades, contingent upon signing a comprehensive waiver, forfeiting all rights to future claims or lawsuits against Grantwell Manufacturing. No mention of pension benefits, no continuation of healthcare coverage, no acknowledgement whatsoever of nearly 30 years of exemplary service, just a check and a legal gag order designed to silence me quickly and cheaply. The document explicitly required my signature by 5:00 p.m. the following day, Saturday. They were banking on my fear, my presumed desperation, my age perhaps, to make me sign immediately, without seeking legal counsel. This wasn't standard procedure. This was a targeted, predatory effort to cheat me out of what I had rightfully, legally earned. I carefully set the papers aside. I walked down the hall to my small home office, the room where I often worked late into the night. Behind a neat row of cherished family photo albums on the bookshelf sat a sturdy, fireproof lockbox. My insurance policy, as Thomas used to jokingly call my meticulous record-keeping habits, For the past 4 years, ever since the financial irregularities first started pinging my professional radar, I had been discreetly, methodically bringing home copies of troubling documents, not company secrets, but records pertaining to issues I had officially reported internally. I kept detailed contemporaneous notes of meetings and conversations where my concerns were dismissed. I saved copies of emails outlining patterns of misconduct, emails instructing staff to backdate quality control reports, emails minimizing serious compliance failures, not because I ever planned to use them offensively, but because 30 years in compliance had honed my instincts. Something wasn't right at Grantwell, and I felt compelled to maintain my own accurate record. I opened the box now, the key turning smoothly in the lock. Inside, neatly organized, were the fruits of my diligence: loan applications with clearly falsified collateral data, quarterly reports with figures that didn't align with audited inventory, chains of emails instructing mid-level managers to manage the narrative on quality control failures, documentation of backdated certifications on products already shipped. It was all there. Over 1,000 pages of meticulously organized evidence, painting a damning picture of systematic fraud that had significantly accelerated under David Langston's brief, disruptive tenure. And I had reported every single significant issue through the proper internal channels, only to be ignored, stonewalled, or subtly sidelined. Enough was enough. I reached for my personal cell phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years: Gregory Santos. Greg had been Grantwell's chief financial officer for over a decade, before leaving amicably 3 years ago to take a senior position with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. He was brilliant, ethical, and had always respected my diligence, my refusal to cut corners, even when others in management found my thoroughness tedious or obstructive. It's time, I thought, my finger hovering over his name, the decision solidifying with quiet certainty. It's long past time. My finger tapped Gregory Santos's name. He answered on the third ring, his voice unchanged despite the years. Warm, professional, intelligent. Melody Reynolds? Is that really you? It's been ages. It has, Gregory, I replied, relief washing over me at the sound of his familiar voice. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, but I need your advice. Something's happened. For nearly 2 hours that Friday evening, I laid out the entire situation: the decades of service, the imminent pension vesting, the abrupt termination under the guise of budget cuts, the insulting severance offer with its tight deadline, and most importantly, the 4 years of documented financial irregularities I had tried, and failed, to get addressed internally. I described the lockbox, the nature of the evidence I possessed, the falsified reports, the backdated certifications, the patterns of revenue manipulation that seemed clearly designed to inflate the company's stock value, particularly accelerating after David Langston took the helm. Gregory listened intently, interrupting only occasionally with sharp, clarifying questions. He remembered David Langston's reputation from industry circles. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "Melody," he finally said, his voice measured but carrying a new gravity. "Based on everything you've just described, this isn't just a potential case of wrongful termination or age discrimination, though it certainly looks like both. If your documentation supports what you're saying about the financial reporting and backdating, Grantwell could be facing extremely serious securities violations, fraud charges, the timing with your pension. Honestly, that might just be the tip of the iceberg." He explained the robust whistleblower protections available under SEC regulations, protections designed specifically for situations like mine, where internal reporting channels had failed. He assured me that retaliation for reporting potential securities fraud was illegal, and that the SEC took such allegations very seriously, especially when backed by credible evidence. By the end of our conversation, I had a clear path forward. Gregory had arranged for me to meet with a specialized team within the SEC's enforcement division first thing Monday morning. "Do not sign that severance agreement, Melody," he cautioned emphatically before we hung up. "Not under any circumstances. And secure those documents somewhere absolutely safe off-site until your meeting. Make multiple copies. Saturday morning dawned gray and drizzly, mirroring my mood, but I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The anger and hurt were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now they were channeled into focused action. I spent the entire morning at a local copy shop, painstakingly duplicating every single page from my lockbox. Back home, I meticulously organized the evidence chronologically, creating a detailed index and summary sheet for each category of misconduct. The methodical work calmed me, kept my mind occupied, preventing the what-ifs and the anxieties from overwhelming me. By noon, I had 3 identical banker's boxes filled with neatly labeled files. One set was for the SEC meeting. One was for my own personal records, now stored securely at my daughter Elizabeth's request with a trusted former colleague across town. The third set, that would serve as leverage, if needed, though Gregory suspected the SEC investigation would move swiftly once they saw the evidence. My phone began ringing intermittently throughout the afternoon. Caller ID showed Janet from HR, David Langston himself, and even Grantwell's general counsel, Arthur Finch. I let each call go straight to voicemail, my resolve solidifying with each missed connection. Later, I listened to their messages, their tones shifting from professionally concerned to increasingly urgent, bordering on demanding. Melody, Janet here, just checking in, hoping we can get that paperwork finalized today. Easy. Melody, David Langston, we really need that signed agreement back before close of business. I can swing by your house and pick it up personally if that helps expedite things. His offer felt more like a veiled threat. Arthur Finch, the general counsel, was more direct, his voice smooth but carrying an unmistakable undertone of warning. Ms. Reynolds, Arthur Finch calling. It is imperative, for the processing of your severance payment, that we receive your signed agreement before the close of business today, Saturday. Failure to comply could potentially jeopardize the severance package entirely. Their escalating desperation told me everything I needed to know. They weren't just trying to save money on my pension. They were actively trying to buy my silence before the weekend ended, before I had time to consult an attorney, before I could potentially expose whatever they were hiding. They knew they were vulnerable. At precisely 4:30 p.m., my doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Peeking through the peephole, I saw David Langston standing on my front porch, looking impatient and distinctly out of place in his expensive Italian suit amidst the modest, well-kept homes of my quiet neighborhood. I remained perfectly still, away from the door. "Melody, I know you're in there," he called out, his voice tight with annoyance. He knocked again, louder this time. "This is ridiculous. Just sign the damn papers and we can all move on with our lives." I watched, silent and unseen, as he paced frustration on the porch for a few minutes, checked his watch pointedly, and finally, with an exasperated sigh, slid a thick envelope into my mailbox before returning briskly to his gleaming luxury sedan parked at the curb. Only after his car disappeared down the street did I retrieve the envelope. Inside was another pristine copy of the same insulting severance agreement, but this time with a handwritten note scrawled across the top in David's aggressive handwriting. Final opportunity. Must be signed and returned by 9 a.m. Monday. That evening, my daughter Elizabeth called for our regular weekly chat. She immediately picked up on the subtle strain in my voice, the carefully controlled emotions. "Mom? What's going on? You sound different." I had initially planned to downplay the situation, not wanting to worry her. She was settled in Denver, busy with her own career and family. But looking at the boxes of evidence stacked neatly in my office, I knew she deserved the truth. Secrets were part of the problem I was now fighting. "I was terminated yesterday, sweetheart," I said simply, calmly. "What?" Her reaction was immediate shock and outrage. "Terminated? But your pension, you're just days away. They can't do that." "Apparently they did," I replied evenly. "But please don't worry. I promise you, I'm handling it." "Handling it? How? Do you need me to come home? I can be on the first flight from Denver tomorrow morning." "No, Absolutely not, I insisted firmly. Stay put. Everything is under control. I've got this covered, Elizabeth. Truly. After reassuring her, promising to keep her updated, we hung up. I sat alone in my quiet living room as darkness fell outside, the rain tapping softly against the windows. I thought about the meeting scheduled for Monday morning with Gregory and the SEC investigators. For years, I had tried to address Grantwell's growing problems through the proper internal channels, believing, perhaps naively, in the system, in the company's fundamental integrity, despite the warning signs. I had been loyal, discreet, meticulously professional, even when my gut screamed that something was seriously wrong. But Grantwell, under David Langston's leadership, had made its choice. They had chosen expediency over ethics, profit over principle, and intimidation over integrity. And now I would make mine. I would not be signing their coercive agreement. I would not be silenced. And most importantly, I would not let them discard 3 decades of my life, my work, my earned security, without consequence. Monday couldn't come soon enough. Monday morning, Irani should crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the gray drizzle of the weekend. I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years, the anxiety replaced by a steely sense of purpose. I dressed carefully in my best navy suit, the one reserved for critical meetings and presentations, my boardroom armor. Placing the meticulously organized box of documentation into a secure briefcase felt like preparing for battle. The weight of what I was about to do, potentially upending careers, impacting hundreds of employees, triggering a corporate crisis, sat heavily on my shoulders. But beneath the weight, there was also an unshakable sense of rightness. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. The SEC regional offices were located in a modern federal building downtown. The environment was understated but radiated authority. All cool glass partitions, muted tones, and the hushed, focused conversations of people engaged in serious work. Gregory met me in the lobby, his familiar face etched with a few more lines than I remembered, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence and fundamental decency I'd always respected. "Melody," he said warmly, shaking my hand firmly. "It's good to see you, though I truly wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "It's good to see you too, Gregory," I replied sincerely. "Thank you, more than I can say, for taking this so seriously." He led me down a quiet corridor to a secured conference room. Waiting inside were 2 individuals Gregory introduced as key members of the enforcement team. Angela Brennan, a sharp, focused senior enforcement attorney with piercing blue eyes, and James Weston, a meticulous forensic accountant whose gaze seemed to absorb every detail. Both greeted me with professional courtesy, their expressions serious but not unkind. "Mrs. Reynolds," Angela Brennan began, her voice calm and direct, "before we officially start, I want to confirm that you fully understand the process we are initiating today. Once you formally share this information and documentation with us as a whistleblower, an official investigation commences. Given the nature of your allegations, this process, once started, generally cannot be stopped or withdrawn by you. Are you prepared to proceed?" I met her gaze steadily. "Yes, I understand completely." For the next 3 intensive hours, I walked them through everything. I laid out the documentation chronologically, starting with the initial discrepancies I'd noticed 4 years prior, concerning patterns in accounts receivable, shipping manifests that didn't quite match invoices. I detailed the quality control certifications I had discovered were being routinely backdated after products had already been shipped to major clients, a blatant violation of industry regulations and potentially fraudulent. I explained the methods I believed were being used to manipulate quarterly revenue figures, artificially inflating the company's performance, practices that had become markedly more aggressive and systemic in the 6 months since David Langston's arrival. James Weston, the forensic accountant, examined the financial documents I provided with growing concern, occasionally muttering technical observations under his breath. "These discrepancies, they aren't minor rounding errors," Mrs. Reynolds, he noted grimly, after scrutinizing one set of reports. Based on this sample alone, the company appears to have been systematically overstating revenues by at least 18%, possibly more, for the past 2 fiscal years. That's textbook securities fraud. And you reported these specific issues internally through official channels? Angela Brennan asked, her pen poised above her notepad. Multiple times, I confirmed, producing copies of my dated memos, email chains, and meeting requests. Each time, I meticulously documented the issue and the potential compliance violations. The responses varied. Sometimes I was told the issues were known and being addressed. Other times I was informed I was misinterpreting complex data. Occasionally, my reports were simply ignored. When David Langston arrived 6 months ago, the process changed. My concerns, previously submitted to the Internal Audit Committee, started being rerouted directly to his office. And that, I paused, letting the implications sink in, is where they disappeared entirely. Gregory leaned forward, his expression grim. And you firmly believe your termination last Friday was directly related to your reporting of these issues, particularly your recent refusal to certify Langston's latest initiative. Without question, I stated firmly. The timing, literally 3 business days before my pension fully vested, makes that obvious on its own. But more than that, I had formally flagged several major compliance risks associated with his latest cost-cutting initiative just last week. He needed me gone before I could escalate those concerns further, potentially jeopardizing his project and exposing the underlying financial manipulations. As our lengthy meeting concluded, Angela Brennan outlined the next steps. We'll need your formal sworn statement, Mrs. Reynolds, documenting everything you've told us and authenticating these records. Based on the strength and specificity of the documentation you've provided and the clear pattern of potential misconduct, we will likely initiate immediate contact with Grantwell's general counsel today. Our investigation will then proceed, typically remaining confidential until we determine whether formal enforcement action is warranted. How long might that take? I asked, bracing myself for a potentially years-long process. It varies greatly depending on the complexity and the company's cooperation, she replied honestly. But frankly, given the quality of this documentation and the apparent flagrancy of the potential violations, we may move more quickly on this one than usual. Her words proved prophetic. I hadn't even driven halfway back home when my personal cell phone rang. It was Janet from HR, her voice thin and trembling with panic. Melody? Oh my God, Melody, something's happening here. The board just called an emergency. Unscheduled meeting. It started 10 minutes ago. David Langston's been locked in his office all morning, refusing to talk to anyone. And there are rumors flying that SEC investigators contacted Arthur Finch, our general counsel, right after lunch. So it had begun. Far faster, far more dramatically than I could have anticipated. The SEC hadn't wasted a single moment. I'm not surprised, Janet, I said calmly, keeping my voice even. There was a pause. Melody, Janet hesitated, lowering her voice. Did you report something? I simply did what my job required me to do, Janet. What I should have been allowed to do years ago, I replied carefully. What's happening with my pension paperwork? Has there been any update since Friday? That's actually why I was calling, she stammered. The executive committee, what's left of it, is apparently reviewing your termination right now. They've put everything on hold, the severance, the final payout, everything, until further notice. An hour later, barely enough time for the initial shockwaves to ripple through the executive suites, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed a name I recognized, but had rarely interacted with directly. William Hargrove, the chairman of Grantwell's board of directors, a pillar of the St. Paul business community. His typically confident, booming voice sounded strained, almost reedy. Ms. Reynolds? William Hargrove calling. We, seem to have a situation here at Grantwell that appears to require your input, your perspective. His attempt at nonchalance was almost comical. Would you perhaps be willing to come down to the office tomorrow morning, say 9 o'clock, to discuss matters? I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Hargrove, I replied politely but firmly. Given the circumstances of my termination last Friday and the subsequent involvement of regulatory bodies, any future discussions should necessarily include my legal counsel, and potentially, I added pointedly, representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission as well. I'm sure as chairman, you understand the need for proper channels in sensitive situations. The silence on the other end of the line was profound, stretching for several long seconds. Finally, he cleared his throat, the sound papery thin. I see. Yes. Of course. Perhaps we can arrange something more formal then, through counsel. As I hung up the phone, I felt no triumph, no flicker of satisfaction, only a deep, profound weariness at the sheer wasteful necessity of it all. I had never wanted this confrontation, this crisis. I had only ever wanted to do my job with integrity, earn my promised retirement, and fade quietly into the background. But Grantwell, through its negligence and greed, had forced my hand. And now, we would all have to face the unavoidable consequences. My phone continued to ring sporadically throughout the evening, former colleagues fishing for information, anxious mid-level managers, even other executives attempting clumsy damage control or seeking clarification. I answered none of them. The time for quiet, internal conversations had long passed. Now, everything would unfold in the harsh, unforgiving light of public scrutiny and regulatory investigation. By Wednesday morning, just 5 days after my termination, the situation had exploded from an internal crisis into a full-blown public storm. The St. Paul Business Journal and other local news outlets ran front-page headlines. SEC launches investigation into Grantwell Manufacturing amid compliance concerns. Details were initially scarce, but the mere mention of an SEC probe sent the company's stock into a nosedive, plummeting nearly 15% by mid-morning. Financial analysts who, just weeks before, had lauded David Langston's aggressive efficiency measures were now publicly questioning the integrity of Grantwell's financial reporting and corporate governance. The narrative had flipped with dizzying speed. That afternoon, I received a formal, overnighted letter from Grantwell's legal department. It officially withdrew my termination notice, stating it was under review, and placed me on paid administrative leave with full pay and benefits, effective retroactively to the previous Friday. It was a transparent, almost pathetic attempt to mitigate legal damage related to wrongful termination and potential whistleblower retaliation. An attempt that came far too late. At 10:00 a.m. the following day, Thursday, my newly retained attorney, Barbara Reynolds, no relation, though the shared surname provided a small ironic amusement, accompanied me to a meeting requested by the board at Grantwell's headquarters. The atmosphere inside the building was thick with tension. The usual morning bustle was replaced by hushed, anxious whispers. Employees huddled in small groups that fell silent as Barbara and I walked past. The same security guard who had awkwardly escorted me out just 6 days prior now nodded respectfully, holding the elevator door for us. We were shown directly to the main boardroom. Waiting around the long, polished table were William Hargrove, the chairman, looking considerably older and more strained than he had just days before, the company's lead outside counsel, and 3 other long-standing board members, their faces grim. David Langston was conspicuously absent. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Ms. Reynolds," William began, his voice lacking its usual confident timbre. "As you know, the company has initiated a comprehensive internal investigation into the concerns you've raised regarding certain reporting practices. We want to assure you we are taking this matter with the utmost seriousness." Barbara spoke before I could, her voice calm but carrying undeniable authority. "Let's be unequivocally clear about something, Mr. Hargrove. My client, Ms. Reynolds, didn't suddenly raise these concerns after her termination. She meticulously documented and repeatedly reported them through established internal channels over a period of 4 years, precisely as her senior compliance role required her to do. The company's consistent decision to ignore, dismiss, or bury those reports, followed by the termination of her employment mere days before her pension vested, speaks volumes about the corporate culture we are now supposedly investigating. William shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair. Yes, well, that historical context is certainly part of what our internal investigation will address. But moving forward, I want to personally assure Ms. Reynolds that her termination has been rescinded. We consider her an employee in good standing, with all rights and benefits fully intact, including my fully vested pension as of this past Monday, I interjected, quietly but firmly, meeting his gaze directly. Yes, of course, absolutely, he replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. Your pension is secure. In fact, he added, attempting a conciliatory tone, given your decades of expertise and institutional knowledge, the board is prepared to offer you a lucrative consulting role after your official retirement date, which, of course, you can begin immediately if you wish. We deeply value your expertise. My client isn't making any decisions regarding her future employment status or potential consulting arrangements today, Barbara interrupted smoothly. And frankly, Mr. Hargrove, any discussion about future arrangements should be preceded by a full and transparent accounting of precisely how and why her previous, repeatedly documented concerns were systematically suppressed by management and, potentially, this board. The meeting continued for another hour, largely consisting of the board members attempting to distance themselves from David Langston's actions and the specific financial irregularities I had documented. They painted themselves as victims of misinformation provided by Langston, expressing profound shock and disappointment at the apparent misconduct that had occurred under their noses. I remained mostly silent throughout, allowing Barbara to handle the legal parrying, while I carefully observed their body language, their shifting eye contact, their carefully worded denials. These were men, and they were all men. I had worked alongside, albeit at a distance, for years. Yet, in all that time, they had barely noticed my existence, dismissing me as a necessary but tedious functionary. Now, suddenly, they couldn't look away, their expressions a potent cocktail of fear, feigned contrition, and a grudging, newfound respect born entirely of vulnerability. As Barbara and I prepared to leave, William Hargrove made one final appeal. Melody, Ms. Reynolds, we are hoping, as we move forward with our internal review and cooperate with the SEC, that you might consider speaking with the investigators about the significant corrective actions we are already taking. Your support in demonstrating the company's commitment to reform would be invaluable. I stopped at the door and turned back to face him directly, my voice steady, carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room. Mr. Hargrove, I spent 29 years, 11 months, and 27 days dedicated to this company's compliance and ethical operation. During that time, according to my records, I filed 47 major internal reports documenting potentially serious irregularities. I sent 16 specific memos directly addressing the accounting and reporting issues now under investigation by the SEC. I formally requested 9 meetings with executive leadership, including yourself, to discuss these growing concerns over the past 4 years. Only 2 of those meetings were granted, and neither resulted in any substantive action. At what point, Mr. Hargrove, in that long and documented history, did I ever have your support or the support of this board in upholding the company's stated commitment to integrity? The silence in the room was absolute, thick enough to cut with a knife. I will cooperate fully and truthfully with both your internal investigation and the SEC, I continued calmly. But I will be speaking only to the facts, as I have always done. Whether those facts ultimately support or further damage Grantwell Manufacturing will depend entirely on what the evidence reveals about what you and others did, Mr. Hargrove, not on what you say in this room today. As Barbara and I walked down the hushed hallway towards the elevators, she leaned in and whispered, "That, my dear Melody, was perfectly stated." It wasn't until we reached the anonymity of the parking lot that I allowed myself a long, deep breath. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation began to ebb, leaving me feeling drained but remarkably clear-headed. This wasn't victory, not yet. It was merely the beginning of a long, arduous process of accountability. "So what happens now?" I asked Barbara as we stood beside our cars. "Now?" She offered a slight, wry smile. "Now they scramble. They hire more lawyers, conduct their internal investigation, primarily focused on limiting corporate liability, and try to negotiate the least damaging settlement possible with the SEC, all while attempting to manage the public relations nightmare. The investigation will continue, likely for months, possibly longer. But make no mistake, Melody," she added, her smile fading into seriousness. "They are absolutely terrified of you." I shook my head slowly. "They're not terrified of me, Barbara. They're terrified of the truth. There's a difference," and Barbara nodded thoughtfully, unlocking her car door. "There is indeed, and that difference," she said, meeting my eyes, "is precisely why you'll win this, Melody, regardless of how it ultimately plays out." Driving home, I wondered what Thomas would have made of all this chaos. My quiet, steady husband had always championed my meticulous nature, my insistence on doing things the right way, even when others found it frustrating or unnecessary. "Your attention to detail isn't a quirk, Melody," he used to say fondly. "It's a superpower." Perhaps, after all these years, he had been right. The additional evidence Melody provided acted like a lightning strike within Grantwell's already turbulent executive suite. The emergency board meeting convened that Monday morning became a scene of rapid collapse. Armed with proof of prior knowledge and potential complicity, the SEC investigators presented their preliminary findings with unsparing clarity. Before the presentation even concluded, 3 long-serving board members tendered their immediate resignations, leaving David Langston isolated and without allies. By noon, Grantwell issued a carefully worded press release announcing a significant leadership restructuring, confirming the departure of 4 board members, including Chairman Hargrove, the termination of David Langston for cause, and pledging full, unequivocal cooperation with all regulatory authorities. The company's stock, predictably, continued its downward spiral. The following day, Melody, accompanied by her attorney, Barbara, met with the newly appointed interim CEO, Patricia Donovan, at Barbara's office. Patricia, looking weary but resolute, skipped the formalities. "Melody," she began, "the company is in crisis, largely because warnings like yours were ignored for years. You were right, and you were wronged. On behalf of Grantwell, I offer our sincerest apologies." She slid a folder across the table. "This officially rescinds your termination, reinstates your employment retroactively to ensure seamless pension vesting, and confirms that full vesting occurred as scheduled." Inside, the folder also contained a substantial settlement offer, a lump sum equivalent to 5 years' salary and lifetime health care coverage, acknowledging the significant personal and professional difficulties Melody had endured. "We are also establishing a new independent corporate ethics division," Patricia added. "We hope you might consider consulting on its design after your retirement." Melody acknowledged the offer, but politely declined the consulting role. Her future lay elsewhere now. The wheels of justice, though sometimes slow, ground inexorably forward. 6 months later, Melody sat quietly in a federal courtroom. She watched as David Langston, looking deflated and stripped of his former arrogance, along with 2 of the former board members implicated by her final batch of evidence, entered guilty pleas to multiple charges of securities fraud and conspiracy. Their downfall was complete, a stark consequence of greed and ethical failure. The Grantwell scandal became a frequently cited cautionary tale in business schools and corporate governance seminars. Melody herself received a significant whistleblower award from the SEC under their program rewarding individuals who expose major fraud. 15% of the substantial penalties levied against the company and the individuals involved. Combined with her fully secured pension and the settlement package, she found herself in a position of unexpected financial security. True to her character, she didn't hoard it. One of her first acts was establishing the Thomas Reynolds Memorial Scholarship Fund at the University of Minnesota, dedicated to supporting women pursuing careers in corporate ethics and compliance, a fitting tribute to her late husband's belief in her superpower. Instead of returning to the corporate world, Melody chose a different path. She began working periodically with regulatory agencies and academic institutions, sharing her experience to help develop more effective compliance training programs and stronger whistleblower protections. The quiet satisfaction derived from this work, from potentially preventing future Grantwells, far outweighed any lingering bitterness. Her daughter, Elizabeth, had followed through on her offer and relocated back to St. Paul with her family. Weekends were now filled with the joyous chaos of grandchildren, lakeside strolls, and the simple pleasure of shared meals, the kind of relaxed family time Melody had often sacrificed during her demanding career. One crisp autumn evening, watching her grandchildren chase fireflies by the lake, Elizabeth revisited a question. "Mom, looking back now, any regrets about those 30 years?" Melody smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. "No, sweetheart. I don't regret the work, the dedication, or even the fight at the end. I regret it was necessary, but not the actions I took." She watched a firefly blink near the water's edge. Integrity isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Knowing you did the right thing, that's a reward no severance package can buy. She had stood firm, spoken truth to power, and weathered the storm. Vindication hadn't come through revenge, but through the quiet, unwavering application of her principles. The outcome wasn't just justice for herself, but a ripple effect contributing to a more ethical business landscape, and perhaps most importantly, a legacy of integrity recognized by those she loved most. She was no longer just Melody Reynolds, the overlooked compliance officer. She was Melody Reynolds, a woman who had found her voice, reclaimed her power, and forged a new purpose on her own terms. Melody Reynolds' story is a compelling testament to the power of quiet integrity and unwavering principle in the face of corporate greed and retaliation. Fired just days before her hard-earned pension vested after nearly 3 decades of loyal service, Melody refused to be silenced or intimidated. Armed with meticulous documentation gathered over years, not for revenge, but as a matter of professional diligence, she made the courageous decision to become a whistleblower. Her journey highlights the critical importance of robust internal compliance systems and the devastating consequences when ethical concerns are ignored or suppressed by leadership focused solely on the bottom line. It also underscores the significant personal risks whistleblowers often face, challenging corrupt systems from within. Yet, Melody's story is ultimately one of vindication. Through her persistence and the irrefutable evidence she provided, justice prevailed. The wrongdoing was exposed, those responsible were held accountable, and she not only secured her rightful pension, but received significant compensation and national recognition. More importantly, she found a new purpose beyond her long career, using her experience and resources to advocate for corporate ethics and inspire others. The key lessons from Melody's experience are profound. Integrity often requires courage, especially when confronting power. Meticulous documentation and adherence to procedure can be powerful tools for truth. Doing the right thing, even at great personal cost, can lead to unforeseen positive outcomes and inspire meaningful change. And finally, true vindication lies not in retribution, but in upholding one's values and contributing to a more ethical future. Thank you for joining us for Melody's incredible story of courage and integrity on Life Stories. If you were inspired by her determination to stand up for what's right, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories that matter. Remember to always trust your professional instincts and document everything. Until next time, stay principled. And Barbara nodded thoughtfully, unlocking her car door. "There is indeed, and that difference," she said, meeting my eyes, "is precisely why you'll win this, Melody, regardless of how it ultimately plays out." Driving home, I wondered what Thomas would have made of all this chaos. My quiet, steady husband had always championed my meticulous nature, my insistence on doing things the right way, even when others found it frustrating or unnecessary. "Your attention to detail isn't a quirk, Melody," he used to say fondly. "It's a superpower." Perhaps, after all these years, he had been right. The additional evidence Melody provided acted like a lightning strike within Grantwell's already turbulent executive suite. The emergency board meeting convened that Monday morning became a scene of rapid collapse. Armed with proof of prior knowledge and potential complicity, the SEC investigators presented their preliminary findings with unsparing clarity. Before the presentation even concluded, 3 long-serving board members tendered their immediate resignations, leaving David Langston isolated and without allies. By noon, Grantwell issued a carefully worded press release announcing a significant leadership restructuring, confirming the departure of 4 board members, including Chairman Hargrove, the termination of David Langston for cause, and pledging full, unequivocal cooperation with all regulatory authorities. The company's stock, predictably, continued its downward spiral. The following day, Melody, accompanied by her attorney, Barbara, met with the newly appointed interim CEO, Patricia Donovan, at Barbara's office. Patricia, looking weary but resolute, skipped the formalities. "Melody," she began, "the company is in crisis, largely because warnings like yours were ignored for years. You were right, and you were wronged. On behalf of Grantwell, I offer our sincerest apologies." She slid a folder across the table. "This officially rescinds your termination, reinstates your employment retroactively to ensure seamless pension vesting, and confirms that full vesting occurred as scheduled." Inside, the folder also contained a substantial settlement offer, a lump sum equivalent to 5 years' salary and lifetime health care coverage, acknowledging the significant personal and professional difficulties Melody had endured. "We are also establishing a new independent corporate ethics division," Patricia added. "We hope you might consider consulting on its design after your retirement." Melody acknowledged the offer, but politely declined the consulting role. Her future lay elsewhere now. The wheels of justice, though sometimes slow, ground inexorably forward. 6 months later, Melody sat quietly in a federal courtroom. She watched as David Langston, looking deflated and stripped of his former arrogance, along with 2 of the former board members implicated by her final batch of evidence, entered guilty pleas to multiple charges of securities fraud and conspiracy. Their downfall was complete, a stark consequence of greed and ethical failure. The Grantwell scandal became a frequently cited cautionary tale in business schools and corporate governance seminars. Melody herself received a significant whistleblower award from the SEC under their program rewarding individuals who expose major fraud. 15% of the substantial penalties levied against the company and the individuals involved. Combined with her fully secured pension and the settlement package, she found herself in a position of unexpected financial security. True to her character, she didn't hoard it. One of her first acts was establishing the Thomas Reynolds Memorial Scholarship Fund at the University of Minnesota, dedicated to supporting women pursuing careers in corporate ethics and compliance, a fitting tribute to her late husband's belief in her superpower. Instead of returning to the corporate world, Melody chose a different path. She began working periodically with regulatory agencies and academic institutions, sharing her experience to help develop more effective compliance training programs and stronger whistleblower protections. The quiet satisfaction derived from this work, from potentially preventing future Grantwells, far outweighed any lingering bitterness. Her daughter, Elizabeth, had followed through on her offer and relocated back to St. Paul with her family. Weekends were now filled with the joyous chaos of grandchildren, lakeside strolls, and the simple pleasure of shared meals, the kind of relaxed family time Melody had often sacrificed during her demanding career. One crisp autumn evening, watching her grandchildren chase fireflies by the lake, Elizabeth revisited a question. "Mom, looking back now, any regrets about those 30 years?" Melody smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. "No, sweetheart. I don't regret the work, the dedication, or even the fight at the end. I regret it was necessary, but not the actions I took." She watched a firefly blink near the water's edge. "Integrity isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Knowing you did the right thing, that's a reward no severance package can buy." She had stood firm, spoken truth to power, and weathered the storm. Vindication hadn't come through revenge, but through the quiet, unwavering application of her principles. The outcome wasn't just justice for herself, but a ripple effect contributing to a more ethical business landscape, and perhaps most importantly, a legacy of integrity recognized by those she loved most. She was no longer just Melody Reynolds, the overlooked compliance officer. She was Melody Reynolds, a woman who had found her voice, reclaimed her power, and forged a new purpose on her own terms. Melody Reynolds' story is a compelling testament to the power of quiet integrity and unwavering principle in the face of corporate greed and retaliation. Fired just days before her hard-earned pension vested after nearly 3 decades of loyal service, Melody refused to be silenced or intimidated. Armed with meticulous documentation gathered over years, not for revenge, but as a matter of professional diligence, she made the courageous decision to become a whistleblower. Her journey highlights the critical importance of robust internal compliance systems and the devastating consequences when ethical concerns are ignored or suppressed by leadership focused solely on the bottom line. It also underscores the significant personal risks whistleblowers often face, challenging corrupt systems from within. Yet, Melody's story is ultimately one of vindication. Through her persistence and the irrefutable evidence she provided, justice prevailed. The wrongdoing was exposed, those responsible were held accountable, and she not only secured her rightful pension, but received significant compensation and national recognition. More importantly, she found a new purpose beyond her long career, using her experience and resources to advocate for corporate ethics and inspire others. The key lessons from Melody's experience are profound. Integrity often requires courage, especially when confronting power. Meticulous documentation and adherence to procedure can be powerful tools for truth. Doing the right thing, even at great personal cost, can lead to unforeseen positive outcomes and inspire meaningful change. And finally, true vindication lies not in retribution, but in upholding one's values and contributing to a more ethical future. Thank you for joining us for Melody's incredible story of courage and integrity on Life Stories. If you were inspired by her determination to stand up for what's right, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories that matter. Remember to always trust your professional instincts and document everything. Until next time, stay principled.